All right, welcome to Cwic Media's Come Follow Me series. We are covering Doctrine and Covenants, section 45 today. This is given on March 7th, 1831. So coming up on a year here of the organization of the church. And during this time, coming into Kirtland, Ohio, there's only a small minority of the saints that are there. We've got the rest of the saints still in New York. They're going to migrate over here over the next little bit. But it's a time of great persecution and a lot of very negative, dark things being said about the Mormons. They're stirring the pot, right? So you've got a lot of the press that is after them. You've got officials that are after them in the government. You've got, they're being bad-mouthed quite a bit, and it's causing a problem within the church. And so here's how Joseph Smith describes this in the history of the church. He says that at this age of the church, 1 year old, many false reports and foolish stories were published, right? So they're making things up here. There was a big earthquake in China. They called it the earthquake of Mormonism or something to that effect, right? It's like anything they could tie to something negative or anything negative they could tie to the church, they would do it. And so there's maybe a little bit of a deflated feeling here in the church with what they're having to deal with here. And of course, this was around right from the very beginning with Joseph Smith, and it never goes away. It ends up being what kills him, right? So he talks about that, and then he says, it says that these things were to prevent people from investigating the work, right? So that's a concern for them, obviously, because they're out there, they're sending missionaries out, they're trying to get people to hear about the Book of Mormon, about the restoration of the gospel, and these stories and this attitude has been very, very negative to the church. So it's prevented them from investigating the work or embracing the faith. But to the joy of the saints, I received the following. So why is a prophecy talking about a timetable of events, right, going to be something that is of great joy for the saints? And I think the reason is that it's like with any of us, it's helping to give them a bearing on things of where they are. It creates a purpose. It creates urgency. And, it's like going to the temple, right? You get your bearings when you go to the temple. And it's kind of a physical map that is given to us, and that's pretty much what we do when we go through the temple, is giving us kind of this map that we're able to act out in a physical form. This is kind of a time map, in a sense, that's given. And like we've talked about before, it seems to be just another type of revelation that is given at the beginning of each dispensation. Something that we hear, we basically go into the words of Jesus here, when he's on the Mount of Olives, given to us in Matthew 24, where we have again, the beginning of a dispensation, and the urgency is given, the map is given of time. So we get a physical map in the temple, we get a map of time with this type of an eschatological scene, an eschatological journey and direction that's given to the saints. So that's what it seems like to me, right? That's why they're given joy with this. This is where we are. This is why we're battling. This is why we have adversity, because this is what we are a part of here in the last days. These are the things that are going to be happen. This is where we are in history and in the map of time of the Lord. So he says, look, hearken, listen up, right? The church, listen. In verse 2, and again I say, hearken unto my voice, the DBR, lest death shall overtake you. Again, when we talk about the scriptures, it's so interesting. I'll bring up a couple of these points here as we go through this section. But the scriptures, even modern day scriptures, right, coming in here through Joseph Smith, reach back to the metaphors, to the language of the ancients, to give this kind of continuity. It's kind of interesting how that works, right? Because it seems to me that what that does is it draws our minds and our hearts back to the fathers, right? We need to learn more about their way of life because these metaphors are given to us today in modern day Scripture. And that's what he does here in verse 2. One of the things is death, understanding death, right? When they talk about death, anciently, they're oftentimes talking about both a temporal and a spiritual death. So we should consider that. We should think about that. Death can mean spiritual as well. But hearken unto my voice, lest death shall overtake you. In an hour when ye think not, the summer shall be past, and the harvest ended, and your souls not saved. So like the fig tree, which we get later on in this section, and using a metaphor of the fig tree when the fruit is supposed to come, this is the same idea. This is the using the rule of the harvest, right? The summer is the time that you prepare, one of the times of the year that you're preparing your land and planting and then getting ready for the harvest in the fall. And so if you don't do all of that on time and not procrastinate, then you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. You're not going to have the harvest. It's not going to happen. And so you have no choice, even though it's something that is coming in the future, right? Several months down the road. If you don't take care of certain things now today, what you need to happen down the road is not going to happen. It's a great metaphor. There's no way around the law of the farm, right? You just can't, you can't avoid that. And so it's the same with us. You know, are we doing everything we can today to avoid not having the harvest at the end? This is also something that we get in Jeremiah 8, right? Jeremiah 8 tells us the exact same thing. There in verse 20, we get the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved, right? Using that type of agricultural metaphor there. And by the way, that chapter in Jeremiah, you know, around the time of Lehi, is also it's about Jerusalem, right? It's about the church. It's about, you're not taking care of things. If you don't take care of things, we're going to have a real problem down the road. And that obviously applies to each of us individually. And then we get a first-person voice of the Savior here, which is kind of nice, right? He goes into verse 3 here. It says, listen to him, talking about himself, who is the advocate with the Father, right? I mean, you should listen to me, he's saying, because I'm the one who is advocating for you in front of justice, basically. I'm the one who's fighting for you. So give ear here. Who is pleading your cause before him, saying, Father, behold the suffering and death of him who did no sin, in whom thou wast well pleased. Behold the blood of thy Son, which was shed, the blood of him whom thou gavest, that thyself might be glorified. So again, I suffered for everyone. Look at what I did for them. That's how he is obviously our advocate, because he stepped in for us by proxy, so to speak. He took on our sins. He suffered immensely. And therefore, that's going to cause attention from the Father, right? He's going to reverence that. He's going to honor that sacrifice and that suffering that the Son went through. And it creates, you know, in many ways, it creates value. Not that the Lord, our Heavenly Father, doesn't see us with value, but it creates value for us because of that sympathy, because of the suffering and the love that Jesus had for us. And then in verse 6, we get another kind of a metaphor here, a little bit from the ancient days about a period of time. He says, Hearken, O ye people of my church, and ye elders, listen together and hear my voice while it is called today, and harden not your hearts. Well, again, today is a metaphor. We see it as 24 hours, but being a day, being now, but it's really a period of time. So today is our period of time right now, like with the creation, right? It's each yom, day 1, day 2, day 3, etc., is a period of time. And that's what that's talking about. And then he starts going into the prophecies that Nephi gets from the angelic host as well. and that we get in Isaiah everywhere, which is all about the Jews and the Gentiles, right? The house of Israel and those outside of the house of Israel. And he says here in verse 8, I came unto mine own, being the Jews, and mine own received me not. But unto as many as received me gave I power to do many miracles, and to become the sons of God. In other words, he's no respecter of persons. He's anybody who chooses to follow him has the chance to be a son or daughter of God. And even unto them that believed on my name gave I power to obtain eternal life. So as he goes through the Jews and the Gentiles here, it's like, look, everybody has their role in this. I am not a respecter of one toward the more than the other. What matters to me here is that you believe on my name and that you follow me. But it is requisite that in the plan of God that there are differences and different peoples, different individuals, right, that will end up helping each other out. And that's what the Jews and the Gentiles end up doing. It's really kind of nice to see the plan of salvation play out on earth among these different groups. We're used to being in tribal situations. That's the exact opposite of what the Lord chooses for us, what he wants from us, right? Where we have rivalries and war and contention. And being one is us learning to help each other out, to love one another, to bear each other's burdens, including between tribes, between nations, between peoples, between races. And he says, even so I have sent mine everlasting covenant into the world, right? So this is the gospel. This is the fullness of the gospel with its ordinances, with the church helping it, right, and supporting it. To be a light to the world and to be a standard for my people. So this is the banner, right, that is held up that we can all move toward, right, that we hold up and see, and it's like, okay, this is the banner of Jesus Christ. And regardless of who we are, what our race is, what our past beliefs might be, what our past sins might be, and regardless of our nationality, our ethnicity, right, we are pulled together here if we all look to God, if we have in our values hierarchy Christ at the very top, and we support one another, and we become one. And that's a good way to look at who is going to follow Christ. It's those that are willing to become one with others and to help them do that. That doesn't mean tolerating sin or just tolerating whatever. It means supporting one another and bearing each other's burdens in the gospel, right, under gospel principles. And as he says, he went to the Jews and they did not accept him. This is during his mortality. He says, the standard is for the Gentiles to seek it and to be a messenger before my face to prepare the way before me, right? So the Gentiles, the day of the Gentile, the time of the Gentiles is now. And the Gentiles looking here are those that are mostly gathering together here in Ohio to build up the church, to build up the kingdom. This is them. And so there's the urgency, right? It's like, you're the Gentiles. You are here to hold up the standard and to gather Israel, to create Zion, to be the messenger before my face, to prepare the way before me. It's a pretty awesome responsibility, right? And to have that directly given to you is, oh, this is us. And look, this is in Isaiah, right? We see in Zechariah. We can go back to Ezekiel. We can bring all these things together. Daniel, looking at the coming of the Lord and what builds up there. We can look in the Book of Mormon now and see in Nephi and throughout all of the Book of Mormon. This is us, is what these early saints are thinking. This is our time. We need to work hard. We need to build up the church, spread the gospel, gather Israel so we can get ready for the royal procession, so we can get ready for the second coming of Christ. So regardless of the adversity, regardless of the demeaning of the gospel and of the people, the accusations that are flying toward them, They're going to rise up, hold up the standard, and do this work. Think of the energy that that can give you if you really hold that close to you. There's this adversity around me. It's holding me back, but now I feel more purpose. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what the Lord wants me to be doing. This is what has been prophesied about me and my people. And that's how I think the saints, this kind of was like a big shot in the arm to them, right? And then more references to Isaiah in 10. Wherefore come ye unto it, and with him that cometh I will reason. I love that, right? I love the idea of reasoning with the Lord. And I think we lose that a little bit, and in a way that, I like reading about Enos and his struggle with the Lord, and Jacob and his struggle with the Lord, his wrestling with the Lord. Because to me, there's something there as far as engagement that goes well beyond passivity, right? That doesn't mean it's not submissive. It means that you're fighting mostly with yourself in trying to figure things out and work through things. And here again, we get this invitation, as we do in Isaiah, right? To reason with me. Just as with men in days of old, and I will show unto you my strong reasoning. So if you are kind of like I am and you need reason, right, you need that, then he says right here, I will give that to you. I will give you reasoning. Now, there's requirements for that. You need to exert faith. You need to have some trust, but he will give it to you. Then he rolls right into Enoch, because what does Enoch have to do with all this? Well, that's the end game, right? That's bringing everybody together as one into a Zion-type people, into a Zion city, into the new Jerusalem, into what Jerusalem is supposed to represent. And so he lays that out there as a layer of this before he starts going into a pattern of prophecies to say this is what we want to end up at. Again, whole parts whole. And then he says this about those that of the city of Enoch here. He says that they confessed they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. That is a really interesting way to think about this. And what an awareness I think that is. I love the idea of being aware of soberness, of sobriety. And this awareness here is, I think, very important, this perspective of understanding that on earth here, we are strangers and pilgrims, right? A stranger anciently would mostly be someone who is like a resident alien, what we might call them, right? Somebody who is from another land, but is living in a separate land, a stranger in a strange land, right? Or a pilgrim who is on his way somewhere. And so if we have that perspective, that this is kind of like we're just renting time here. This isn't really our time, so to speak. We're renting time in this space, and then we're going to be going elsewhere, back to a home that we used to know. That's a strong perspective. It helps you think, I'm not just carnal, right? I'm not just temporal. And I'm not just absorbed in this world around me. I don't actually even belong here. I'm here for an adventure. I'm here for a journey. I'm here for growth and progression. It is a phase. It is a stage of our existence. Then he says, but those strangers and pilgrims would obtain a promise that they should find it and see it in their flesh. Right? Well, what promise? The promise, again, when they talk about a promise, it's the oath of the oath and covenant of the priesthood. It's the promised land. Right? That's the promise of the fathers. It's exaltation. Exaltation is a promised land, a place, a different state that is not our current mortal state. And then he goes over some of these things, just like this is what he says here about when he was in mortality to the disciples. He says, I will show it plainly, the prophecies, as I showed it unto my disciples, as I stood before them in the flesh and spake unto them, saying, as ye have asked of me concerning the signs of my coming, and the day when I shall come in my glory in the clouds of heaven, to fulfill the promises that I have made unto your fathers. For as ye looked upon the long absence of your spirits from your bodies to be a bondage, I will show unto you how the day of redemption shall come, and also the restoration of the scattered Israel. All right, so just a couple things here that we get out of this. First of all, again, this is like we're getting with the law that we had last week. Just like Moses put out the law, we get the law in section 42 from last week. Right? Here now he's laying out something else that we've already had before in a previous dispensation. So that's a way of looking at each of these dispensations. And we can see, it's kind of like if you went back to Exodus, you could probably see things that would be like sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that were being laid out by Moses in that new dispensation. You could get the same thing if you go back to the time of Jesus, because he is not just the Savior, he is the head of a dispensation where the fullness of the gospel is again brought to the earth. The second thing about this is he says, I will show unto you how the day of redemption shall come. Right? And also the restoration of the scattered Israel. Well, this is like they're the same thing in a way. It's a metaphor, right? Or a simile, I guess, in this example. It is, the day of redemption is like the restoration of the scattered Israel, right? In other words, it's scattered Israel, as we've talked about with covenant before, right? There's our covenant with God. And the first half of that covenant is being separated from him. The second half of that covenant is being brought back together with him, being restored to him. It's the same idea with Israel. As we go through time on earth, we are going through covenant. We are going through the process of creation, of being born anew over and over again. Not just individually, but as peoples. And not just as peoples, but as generations, back to the fathers and the mothers, right? This is a way to say, look, the scattering of Israel, being separated everywhere, that's part of the process. That's what you do. Because then you can work at gathering it back together again. That is creation. That's the process of creation. That is the Genesis story of the creation. Everything being separated, light and dark, water and land, right? The waters above the firmament, the waters below the firmament, all the different plants, all the different animals. Adam and Eve are separated through the rib. And then now then we turn things into a process of bringing everything back together, of becoming one, but not the same, right? It's bringing everything back together as a union. That is creation. You'll notice that in the world today, you'll see ideologies that want everything to be the same, right? Men and women to be exactly the same. Families to fall apart because that helps distinguish man and woman. They want peoples to be actually the same. It's like, no, we need to celebrate our differences and work with each other with those strengths and weaknesses that we have. That's charity. That is love. That is oneness. It's not sameness. It's one heart and one mind by taking our strengths, which we all have, all individuals, all races, all peoples, all cultures, and taking those strengths and helping others, and accepting that in humility, the strengths that others have to give to us. And we're going to highlight that in just a minute. So the restoration of Israel is part of the creation process. And then in speaking of the Jews, to the Jews of that time in Jesus' period, he says this to them in verse 21, and it shall come to pass that this generation of Jews shall not pass away until every desolation which I have told you concerning them shall come to pass. Right? So this is exactly what happens in the year 66 AD. So somewhere more or less around 30, 35 years from the time of the resurrection. the Jews take over Jerusalem, right? It's their place, their city. They take over Jerusalem. They take it under siege from the Romans. And there's a battle for about 4 years. And the Romans win, of course. And the destruction and the annihilation is immense. The suffering is immense. The death is immense. And those that remain are scattered abroad. And so remember, we had the scattering that would have happened with the 10 tribes about 800 years before that from the northern kingdom. Part of the process, part of the creation process. And now we have the scattering of those in Judah a little after the time of Jesus. And he says, when this happens, there will be a remnant that will be scattered among all nations. So why does that matter? What does that mean? Well, I think, number one, we can talk about a couple things. We can talk about how the story of the Jews continues in other lands, having a minority of Jews in those lands, right? That's been a very difficult thing for them throughout the centuries. The second thing is the mixture of blood. That seems to be important. I don't know why. I've got a few thoughts on it I'm not going to go over right now, but the mixture of blood that probably happened from the lost 10 tribes also seems to come into play on this, right? It's the blood of Abraham and maybe the blood of Isaac and Jacob as well that becomes important. And that might have something to do with the timing of this last dispensation and when the gospel was restored. Things have to be done in order. And just as we said, right, you have to work in the summer to have the harvest in the fall. And so that seems to be part of the work of what needs to happen. And then, of course, he says the second half of that, the Gentiles will help gather the Jews. They will help gather Israel from all nations. And then he says this, as we just talked about, charity and differences between people. I think this is a very, it's very apt today in understanding what's going on. It says, and the love of men shall wax cold, and iniquity shall abound. So let's think about what this is. This to me is trying to model the love of Christ, right? It is the doctrine of Christ. It is doing what? How can the love of men wax cold? Well, of course, through iniquity, right? We harden our hearts. But I think another way of that is that we become tribalized, much more tribalized, or nationalized, or genderized, or whatever it might be, right? And what I mean by that is that we have contention, that there are philosophies of men that are going to be put into place, that are being put into place now, that are being practiced and implemented, that turn us against each other. I mean, look at us politically, right? That's one way of forming tribalism. The race issues that are bubbling up more and more and more. Those in power in the elite levels of every institution you can think of want us turned against each other. That's what it seems like to me. That's just gospel by Greg. But that's how it seems to me. And so I think it's important for us to look, this is something that's coming. This is something that is happening in the last days. The love of men shall wax cold, and iniquity shall abound. Right? So I think we need to be aware, not just of those things that help us to, or those things that might pull us into iniquity, right? But those things that will remove charity from our hearts for others. And look at philosophies, look at ideologies, and understand them. Is this something that follows charity and the love of Christ? Or is this something that is disguised in something else, and there's a wolf in sheep's clothing? Is this a Trojan horse? Right? I think that's important to look at from any type of identity politics or political groups. seems to be the direction that we're heading right now into, as we were told in the Book of Mormon, we're breaking up into ites, and those lines in the sand are becoming chasms in the sand. I mean, just previous to this, in verse 26, he says, "And in that day shall be heard wars and rumors of wars, and the whole earth shall be in commotion." So settle on things that require charity, that require effort, that require love. We're told also in these last days that there is going to be an overflowing scourge, a desolating sickness shall cover the land, but that the disciples of Christ will stand in holy places. They're going to separate themselves from the world. It's not going to be an easy thing. And then this is a foreshadowing of what we can see for those that are not standing in holy places that we need to be careful of, right? And that is, among the wicked, men shall lift up their voices and curse God and die. Now, why would they curse God? What is the point there? I think it has to do with agency. Not that they have the choice of cursing God, but that because of agency, all of this chaos can enter into the world. And because of agency, if I don't use it wisely, I can be pulled into bad places and go through bad situations. And therefore, I might curse God because of all of this, because of agency. That's just what comes to my mind. I think it's the same thing in the war in heaven. Right? We're doing on something that coming up here probably this week on the war in heaven and agency. Then here in 33, it reminds me of the Jaredites. It says, "And there shall be earthquakes also in diverse places, and many desolations. Yet men will harden their hearts against me, and they will take up the sword one against another, and they will kill one another." Now, why? How does that possibly happen? How do you get into that position? It's through hate, right? It's through negative emotions. It's allowing yourself to build up negative emotions, envy, hate, jealousy. When these things reign supreme with us in our hearts, it's pretty hard to have charity. And then at this point, he starts talking about, look, these bad things are going to happen, but you're going to kind of see this. You're going to know where you're going to get your bearings. You're going to be able to get your bearings on where you're at. He says, "And they shall see signs and wonders." When we see the word signs and wonders, we usually mostly thinking of celestial things, right? Things in the sky, things in the cosmos, right? The sun, the moon, the stars, other things. These are the signs that we get. We think about sign. When you think of signs, you think of like, "Hey man, what sign are you?" Right? And that's based on the zodiac in the sky, right? Those are signs. Now, I'm not saying that has anything to do with the signs that are coming. I'm saying that is how the term is used, the word signs. It's usually you're thinking about something that's up in the sky. "And they shall behold blood and fire and vapors of smoke. And the sun shall be darkened, and the moon be turned into blood, and the stars fall from heaven." Again, I'll go over that still at another time later on in the D&C. But so these signs have become important. You need to know where you're at. And the Lord wants to show us where we're at. And though we might not see signs in the skies right now, I think that we can see the signs in iniquity. We can see the signs that he talks about with ideologies that are coming through and the divisions among people. Now in 43, he says, "The remnant shall be gathered unto this place." Remember, he's talking as if he is in here, talking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives. So in Jerusalem, he's talking about that's where the remnant will be gathered. Well, look what's already happened to the state of Israel. That's not a mistake. And they've been gathering there, especially from the east and the north there, but from all over the world for, give or take about 80 years now. And he says then that the Lord will set foot on the Mount of Olives and it will divide asunder into a big valley, right? And the Jews will be gathered there. And they will see Jesus Christ there. It says in 51, "And then shall the Jews look upon me and say, What are these wounds in thy hands and in thy feet?" right? Again, they're looking for the Messiah. So they're going to say, hey, it's the Messiah. But he's not just a king, and he's not just a warrior, right, to help save them temporally. He's a spiritual savior. And, he happens to be Jesus Christ. And he's going to say, these wounds are the wounds with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. I am he who is lifted up. I am Jesus that was crucified. I am the Son of God. Now, again, to me, in seeing that title right there, the Son of God, he's saying, I am God that came down to earth and took on flesh. Remember, that's the issue for the Jews with the Messiah, with saying Jesus is the Messiah. They think he's a false Messiah, but that's not the issue, right? The issue is that he claims to be God. That's why they put him to death. That is what kills him when he is in front of the high priest, Caiaphas and Annas, at the end of his life, because he says that he is the Son of God. It's not that he's the Messiah. It's that he's saying he's God. So that title here is very appropriate. And then I like what it says here about the 1,000 years that Satan will be bound. It says, and Satan shall be bound, that he shall have no place in the hearts of the children of men. Well, it's the same idea as based on us being prepared and ready and what we do. That is what dictates how the blessings from heaven come, how the veil is opened to us. When are we ready for the law of consecration? Right? When are we ready for the second coming, for the royal procession to come in? It's based on us. And just as we can open the heavens, we can also bind hell, right? Bind Satan through our actions, through our state of being as well. And that's how he's bound. And he goes over the 10 virgins, which is basically the church. Some of this time will be ready. They will have the Spirit with them. They have their lamps filled, and many others will not. Those that do have their lamps filled with oil are they that are wise and have received the truth, so the members of the church, and have taken the Holy Spirit for their guide, and have not been deceived. I think it's interesting that's placed there. And that have not been deceived. So as we're talking about things here about iniquity and ideologies and the loss of charity and love in the last days, if you're deceived, that's where it can take you. So we should not just be a bumper sticker kind of a reader of our world, right? We need to dig into things and see what they mean and where they lead, what the intent is, and not just react from a slogan or a campaign. All right, then he transitions here in verse 60 and starts talking to Joseph about the New Testament. Remember, at this time, this is March 1831, I believe that Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon have only gone through Genesis at this time in the Old Testament. And so now the Lord tells him this, and now behold, I say unto you, as far as translating it, and behold, I say unto you, it shall not be given unto you to know any further concerning this chapter. So he's not giving more information about exactly when something is going to happen in the future, the prophecy. Isn't it interesting? He keeps holding back on those things. Remember, Nephi wasn't able to go through certain things because it was left for the right time and the right person, which was John the Revelator. Nephi seems to have seen the same thing that John saw, but he couldn't write about it. It was held back. Right here, he's saying the same thing. These things that I'm talking about, you're not ready to hear all of this yet. He's going to give it to us when we're ready. And after talking about the end of the world, basically, the second coming, he transitions here in verse 60. He says, and now behold, I say unto you, it shall not be given unto you to know any further concerning this chapter. What chapter? Well, this is about Matthew. Right? This is what we end up with in the Pearl of Great Price, the Joseph Smith Matthew. Right? So the reason is because it's line upon line. It's precept on precept. And so he says, it's not for you to know until the New Testament be translated and in it all these things shall be made known. So within a few days after this, Joseph Smith goes and he translates Matthew here, the same exact chapter 24, right? Chapter 24, and makes some changes and some distinctions from what we have in the King James Version. So it's line upon line, precept upon precept. He wants Joseph Smith to earn it, right? He's got to go back and work through the Bible so that he can receive the revelation. And then finally here, he starts talking about the New Jerusalem and the gathering of the saints in the last days to the New Jerusalem. He says, it shall be called the New Jerusalem, a land of peace. Well, what is Salem? Right? Jerusalem is the same as Salem. That is what Melchizedek called it, the same place. Melchizedek was the king of Salem. Salem is Shalom, right? It is the land of peace. A city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints of the Most High God. And it shall be called Zion. So with all this buildup, everything that's happening, he's coming back to where he started at the beginning of toward the beginning of the section here with the city of Enoch, right? Again, whole parts, breaking it down and to what it's leading up to, which is the city of Enoch, Zion. And then this is an interesting statement here. He says, it shall come to pass among the wicked that every man that will not take his sword against his neighbor. So when he's saying among the wicked, he's not talking about the wicked. He's saying those that are out among the wicked outside of Zion, right, the gathering of Zion, says that every man that will not take up his sword against his neighbor, think of how we might do that today, maybe with our words or with our attitude, must needs flee unto Zion for safety. So if you're not going to participate in the destruction, like with the Jaredites, then you're going to have to be gathered out. You're not going to have a choice. And there shall be gathered unto it out of every nation under heaven. It's a wonderful thought. That's everybody has an opportunity at this. Everybody in this world or the next. That's what this represents to me. And it shall be the only people that shall not be at war one with another. So as the Lord continues to dispense knowledge, wisdom, doctrine, right, he is giving the saints here their bearing, and in turn, with us today, giving us our bearing, as well as we read through these sections. And line upon line, precept upon precept, section upon section, he's telling us who we are, what our relationship is with God, how to improve that, and giving us our bearing as to where we fit in the whole glorious plan of salvation. And hopefully that gives us greater urgency, it gives us greater purpose, greater context, and like the saints of 1831, allows us to deal better with the adversity from the world that we might face. I'll talk to you next time.